Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe good night, ma'am. My name is Raynard Jeremias. I'm from class number 3 and with my student ID number 161. And today, I will present my discussion about the policy implementation. So let's hit it. We start with the background. We all know a policy that formulated by the government is made to be felt by the community. So a policy must be implemented for all the people. And an implementation activity is carried out to achieve the expected result. According to the views by Masmanian and Sabatier in 1979, they state that the main focus of a policy implementation stage is to prove whether a policy that has been made is effective or maybe not. Therefore, we can conclude that the policy implementation is a crucial stage and must be considered in the policy process to make a policy successful. Besides of that, the main focus of our discussion today is about the definition and theories that can describe the policy implementation stage, so we can understand how the basic understanding of policy implementation. We go to the next one. Okay, we started with the definition of policy implementation. Based by Matter and Horn, they stated that the implementation of public policy as is action that taken by individuals or the government or maybe a private group directed at achieving the goals set in previous policy decision. In the other side, this means that the policy implementation is considered a complex phenomenon that may be understood as a process and an output or a result. The other hand, say too by Matter and Carr, say that the policy implementation emphasizes the implementation of a policy by stakeholder for the community to be able to achieve the objective of a policy. At some point, these actions seek to transform decision into operational patterns and continue these efforts to achieve change, both big and small, that are mandated by certain policy decisions. Thus, policy implementation we can define as an action that taken by a public organization directed to achieve the goals set in previous decision. This action includes efforts to convert decision into operational action within a certain period of time, as well as continuing efforts to achieve big and small change determined by policy decision. The implementation of public policy is an important stage in the overall realization of policy. We go with the theory of policy implementation. The first one is theory by Marilee S. Grindle. She stated that policy implementation is a general process of administrative action carried out by the government or the private sector in achieving certain goals. The characteristic of implementing the policy is the interaction between policymakers, policy implementators, and policy users in an interactive model. There are two variables that influence the implementation of public policy, where both of these variables can be parameters of the success of implementing a policy. There are policy process and policy objective achievement. The success of policy implementation is largely determined by the level of implementation of the policy itself, which consists of content of policy and context of policy. This model has six elements of policy content: contain interest affected, type of benefits, extent of change and vision, side of decision making, program implementator, and resource committed, and has three elements of the implementation context that focus in power, in interest, and strategy of actor involved, institution and regime, characteristic, and compliance and responsiveness. From this picture, we can see the model from the Grindle theory that have three steps or three parts about the policy, about the implementation of policy. Start with the first part is start with the existence of goal and objective. And go to the second part that continue with the policy implementation stage. And the last part is the result are in the form of desired impact and the level of change. So in this model has the advantage of the method used, namely the measurement of the success of policy implementation along with output and outcomes. We go to the second theory, the theory by Edward Tree. He states that there are four important variables in policy implementation, namely communication, resources, tendency or behavior, and bureaucratic structure. According to Edwards, the context of tendency and behavior means the willingness, desire, and tendency of the policy makers to implement them seriously so that policy objective can be realized. If a policy wants to be effectively and efficiently implemented, the implementators not only have to know what to do and have the ability to carry out the policy, but also have the intention to implement the policy. In this theory, have the model that you can see about from the picture. Okay, I'm going to help you to tell the other side of this theory too. Fragmentation is the spread of responsibility for a policy to several different bodies so that coordination is needed in its implementation. The fragmented bureaucratic structure can increase the probability of communication failure because the possibility of information distortion will be very large. Although the research of to implement a policy are sufficient, policy implementation may still not be effective due to inefficiency of the bureaucratic structure. This bureaucratic structure include aspects such as member structure, division of authority, and the relationship between organizational units. Okay, now we go on the study, a previous study that we're using for the reference on this discussion. The first study was namely the policy implementation process that written by Thomas B. Smith on 1973. The second study is namely organizing for policy implementation, the emergence and role of implementation unit in policy design and oversight, written by Albert Lindquist on 2007. And the last journal that we use is Learning from Experience, Lesson from Policy Implementation, that written by Milbury McLaughlin on 1987. So what they say about the policy implementation on their journal. Let's see. The first journal. In that journal, Smith tried to explain the policy implementation is not the end of policy process. The statement is driven by observation that found that there was rejection as a response from some community to the implemented policy. Thus, he stated there that after implementation, there must be an evaluation process of the policy to be improved and refined. The second journal said that Lindquist, who examined the policy implementation process of three different bureaucratic bodies, conclude that a bureaucracy should have a special division to evaluate policy. We also believe that the existence of an evaluation division does not make the bureaucracy rigid, but also provides space for policymakers to assess and improve the policy that have been implemented. And the last journal by McLaughlin is he tried to convey the stage of development of policy implementation. The first stage or the first step or the first stage or the first generation focus on analyzing the problems that can occur in policy implementation. The second generation focus on finding alignment between policymaker and the implementation process. And the third generation focus on the human resource that carry out the implementation process. So from my discussion today, the conclusion that I can get is policy implementation is one of the stages carried out in the policy process in the bureaucratic phase. Policy implementation here was defined as an action that taken by an individual government and or bureaucratic bodies in society to achieve the objective of the formulated policy. The view born from policy implementation is the belief that this stage is a process that must be carried out in order to perfect a policy process. However, various literature dispute how policy implementation is the concluding stage of the policy process. The realization that must arise is that the unit construction and evaluation process must also be applied in order to perfect the policy process. Thus, so the policy implementation can so policy process can producing effective and appropriate policy for the community. My recommendation is oversight the implementation of public policy is a very strategic stage. Therefore, the implementation must be carried out by people who are competent and with integrity and be supported by the leaders that and other related parties so that the implementation of public policy can take place effectively and reach the target. Just like the picture that I give, that we should choose the right person to take control the policy implementation. Hear it, boy. And yeah, so that's it. That's all what I can say and share my discussion about policy implementation. So thank you so much for you, ma'am, to hear my presentation. Hopefully, from this presentation, we can be more known about the policy implementation. So again, and I say thank you so much, ma'am, for your attention. Hopefully, you're doing great and always be happy, always smile, just like you say. God bless. Goodbye. Bye bye, ma'am.